Hi there. So full disclosure here. Excuse me. When I was younger, um, probably around in my uh, early to mid 20s, I worked for the environmental organization Greenpeace as a door-to-door canvasser for one summer. Um, it was a job that a friend of mine kind of jokingly said, "Oh, Mike, Greenpeace is looking for people to hire. You may be interested in working for Greenpeace." And so I did. I went and I applied for the job, and I got the job. This was back in the mid 1990s, like 1995. Um, and so I really would have considered myself to be an environmentalist at that time. And the way that things have changed, or the way that things used to work back then, was that um, environmental organizations would lobby or try to affect change within the government so that the government would make policies and new laws basically that were environmentally friendly. This was before the uh, the internet in that sense. Everybody didn't have smartphones or instant access to information, so it was very much a grassroots movement in that sense. And so the way I'm learning, the way things have changed now is that instead of bottom up change, kind of like grassroots change affecting environmental policy, it's kind of like from the top down now, where you see that without consensus, in that sense, that our government or a government can now actually create policy without kind of coming to or arriving at a public consensus. So what does that mean? What does that mean? It means you could wake up one morning and go to Walmart, and whereas in the past, this is already happening. By the way, I'm giving an example of something that's already happening. Whereas in the past, they would provide bags for you after you purchased your items at Walmart, or your item at Walmart. They would provide a bag for you. Whereas now, you have to bring your own bags. And so another thing that you see happening here in Canada with plastic straws and stuff like that. And so um, companies, I don't think in the past you were given an incentive, like, this is something that's good for the environment, so would you consider doing that sort of thing? But what's happening now is that government policy is taking effect, and companies, whether you're a big company like Walmart, a corporation, or a smaller company, you still sort of, as far as I know, I may be wrong about this, but you may have a choice, but you're kind of given more than just an incentive. It's becoming legislated where now you go to Walmart or any kind of store, pretty much. There's very few stores now which provide bags for you, and you bring your own bags. And so from the time that I used to work in Greenpeace, we wanted to see change happen kind of overnight in that sense. But the environmental movement has shifted now, where these types of changes are happening more on a gradual time trajectory, in the sense that things don't just happen overnight. It could seem that way. It could seem like, you were used to going to a certain store and having them provide bags for you, and now you go to that store and you have to bring your own bags. That change may seem like it's happening overnight, but it's actually a gradual change. And so where are we in our society? Yes, when I was growing up, I took some classes at Trent University in regards to the environmental science and stuff, and there was still a debate as to whether climate change was man-made, or if it was something that just naturally has been occurring over the centuries. And so I had a geography teacher kind of point that out to us, kind of like, I think everybody in the classroom. Again, it was like the mid 1990s. Everybody believed that that global warming was man-made, you know, caused by greenhouse gases, and so he kind of gave us the alternate view of that. And so I think that we're living in a culture now that if somebody tries to do that, they will be labeled as somebody who's denying, a global warming denier in that sense. And so it's very dangerous for people to be teaching that global warming isn't man-made in that sense. And so the consensus now is that global warming is climate change is caused by man, and that if we don't do something about it, there's going to be an environmental catastrophe in the future in that sense. And so but again, it's gone from a grassroots movement to kind of like a top down type of thing where they make changes. And so, you know, we had a similar laws regarding not just the environment but other things in Canada over the past 10 to 15 years, where without consensus our government has brought in certain laws and changes to the way that we live our lives. And so this is very dangerous. I think the moment you take power away from the people and you start legislating from the top down rather than the bottom up, that's when people start to get frustrated. And you don't want, especially when it comes to the environment, you want people to willingly participate in change that will kind of help our environment. Being a Christian myself, the Bible teaches that we're to be stewards of this world, stewards of one another, stewards of the environment. And I think when we feel forced to do certain things by our government, that's when it backfires and people start to rebel in that sense. They don't want to be forced to use plastic to use straws that are not made of plastic, for example, or they don't want to be forced not to, or be forced to bring bags to the supermarket. All of these changes should happen in a way that creates motivation for people to continue to do the things that are necessary to protect our environment. And so this is where we are in our society right now, in the sense that it's very difficult for change to come from the bottom up now, even though there are people who still believe in kind of like the grassroots kind of movement of environmental kind of awareness and change. But for the most part, those kind of voices are being silenced. And it's very difficult as well over the years to kind of figure out where the environmental movement is and who's actually the leaders and who's are making the policy changes, because a lot of this comes from the top down. So you know, when a government kind of makes a change, you know, you don't know who's responsible for that change. And so in the past, you had grassroots environmental leaders who you would recognize and who you would trust. And so that's the difference in where we are now. And so just wanted to make this video just to give you a bit of awareness if you're not aware of it already. But yeah, so kind of like the small man, the little man's voice is kind of being silenced by government. And you know, what the government deems is essential for our survival, that's kind of like without consensus. There should always be a consensus. There should always be that dialogue going back and forth. And we desperately need that. We need to bring that back into our culture rather than having change come from the top down. It should still come from the bottom up. Thanks so much. Bye.